The biggest controversy is where insulin resistance starts. What's the root cause of insulin resistance? Because a lot of people in this community think that it's the elevated insulin. So it's kind of like a chicken and the egg. What came first? Was it the elevated insulin that caused the insulin resistance and weight gain? Or was it the fat gain, enlarging our fat cells and gaining fat, that caused the elevated insulin?
Today's episode's brought to you by my free community found at radicallyhealthy.com, where you'll get support in adding things like a GLP-1 to your meaty movement toolbox so you can look and feel your best. Hope to see you there. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. Today, I have Craig and Maria Emmerich, and we are going to go into some hot button topics: insulin, PSMF, the challenges they throw, and so much more. So thank you guys for being here.
Thanks for having
Thank you.
us.
I came to your house and we had the conference on insulin resistance, and you got the wheels turning in my mind. And I want you to share some of that information because I don't think it's widespread. We have people out there like, let's say, Jillian Michaels, who will say insulin resistance is not a real thing.
What?
She says it's an excuse to just not do the hard work and get therapy.
Oh, wow. Nobody wants to have that.
I don't know what that means.
So I'm wondering if you could talk, like, first of all, when you were talking, you were saying that there's more involved than just insulin. You talked about things like glucagon, and are there other hormones? Like, what's going on with this insulin resistance?
So I think the biggest controversy is where insulin resistance starts. What's the root cause of insulin resistance? Because a lot of people in this community think that it's the elevated insulin. So it's kind of like a chicken and the egg kind of thing, right? What came first? Was it the elevated insulin that caused the insulin resistance, and weight gain, or was it the fat gain, the enlarging our fat cells and gaining fat, that caused the elevated insulin? So it's kind of a chicken and the egg kind of thing. And I'm on the side of it's the fat cells getting stuffed and inflamed that causes them to become insulin resistant, and thus the rest of the body becoming insulin resistant.
You had talked about how there were people who created fat cells and people who didn't, and the difference there. Can you tell us what is going on there?
Yeah, so basically there's the vast majority of people after a certain age, usually when you're like a toddler, you stop making lots of new fat cells and you just fill up and empty the ones you have. Okay. And that I learned about that like when I was really young. And at the time I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then never realized how important it would be later in life. But what that sets you up then for is you have a certain number of fat cells on your body based on genetics and other factors when you were young, and you just fill them up and empty them. And so you can have a lot of fat cells, so you can get 100 pounds overweight and still not look too bad metabolically as far as insulin and different blood markers. Or you could be 105 pounds, like one woman we had, Maria can tell a story, but that who was very insulin resistant at 105 pounds because she didn't have a lot of fat cells and they were all stuffed.
It was a woman who she just turned 30 and she just had her first child. And she's like, Maria, I need your help. She was very thin. She was 105 pounds, never would gain weight. She's like, I wish I would gain weight when I cheated because I don't. And we're such a vain society. We don't change anything until you see it on the outside, really. But she started having strokes because her blood glucose was going so high because she was just eating so much junk, but she would never gain weight.
Because she had so few fat cells, just not very many, that they get stuffed and inflamed. So let's talk about what happens when that happens, right? So if you've got only a few fat cells, like she did, they get stuffed really quickly, and so now the body, as you keep eating, what does it have to do? If as you eat, when we're all sitting here at rest, there's only about 80 total calories of all the fuels in your blood. So that's all the ketones, all the free fatty acids, all the glucose in your entire blood volume at rest is like 80 calories. So you eat a meal, that's a lot of energy coming in. Carbs, if you're eating them, and fat. And the body needs to get that out of the blood because it doesn't want all that fuel in the blood because really high triglycerides, if the fat was left in the blood, that's not a good thing. Really high glucose can kill you. So it's going to start prioritizing and dumping these fuels into storage. Well, it's everybody understands that if your triglycerides are 1,000, that's not a good thing, right? No. So what happens with these, in her case, her fat cells are stuffed. They're rejecting insulin, so they're not letting more fat in because they don't want to burst. Fat cells are kind of like a balloon. If they get too stuffed, they could burst. They could only get so big before becoming breaking down. So the fat cell is protecting itself, saying, "I'm full. Reject insulin. Don't put any more fat in me." And so, but they're still eating, right? And so, in her case, she was still eating a lot of carbs. So the carbs were prioritized as a fuel source because too much glucose can actually kill you, right? So that is a more dangerous fuel to have elevated in the short term. So the body's burning glucose and storing it, while all the fat that was eaten is trying to be stored, but the fat cells are like, I don't want it. So where's the fat end up? In the blood. She had very high triglycerides. They end up accumulating in her liver and pancreas and around her organs, and that's insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction and metabolic syndrome. So that's what happens is the fat cells, when they get too many of them get stuffed, fat accumulates in places you don't want it to. And that's, metabolic syndrome.
Oh, that's when we start getting the fatty organs and the visceral fat.
Yeah, because the fat cells are like, I can't take anymore, but you're still eating food. And so the body's trying to figure out where to put it. And because, keeping it in the blood is never a good option.
So hormones must play a role because perimenopause and menopause women always talk about how the visceral fat starts going up.
Well, it's because your estrogen receptors, when you lose estrogen, you become more insulin resistant. That's why you become more sensitive to carbohydrates. You become more sensitive to caffeine. You become more sensitive to alcohol when you go into perimenopause and full-blown menopause. Carbohydrates are not your friend at that time.
So this is why it's so important for us to take care of our babies and our kids, and even when we're pregnant, to protect those cells right from the beginning, to not set them off on a path that they're going to struggle on.
Well, I'm grateful that I had to change my diet when I was 16 years old, because now my friends are going into that perimenopause stage where they're like, help, Maria. But they were the ones that, like, after swim practice, they would go and eat ice cream and stuff. And I just knew I couldn't do that. And they're now struggling, but their habits are, many decades old, and it's hard to change those habits.
That's the thing is, as parents, we sit here and we spend so much time educating our kids, time and money and effort on, in school, and time and money and effort with our kids in sports. How much time and money and effort do we spend educating our kids about food and health?
We spend a lot of time.
Most people spend nothing, and let them be kids and eat all the junk, right? Guess what? When they turn 18, they don't magically learn how to eat healthy. You have to you have to learn through your life, and that's why I agree that it's so important to educate our kids on food, what it is and what it's doing to them, because that long term can be the biggest factor for health and happiness later in life.
So what's happening with these type 1 diabetics?
So type 1 is different. It's a autoimmune where your beta cells of your pancreas, beta cells are the cells that create insulin, aren't creating insulin. And so they might have a few beta cells creating a little bit of insulin, but for the most part, their pancreas isn't working. Well, so it's not putting out insulin.
Let's talk about the type 2s that blow out their beta cells.
Yeah, and actually that woman that was 105 pounds who just ignored her raging blood sugars and all this for a long time, she actually burned out her beta cells to the point where she couldn't produce insulin either. So she was like a type 1.5, kind of in between.
Yeah, we don't want to say type 1 because it wasn't an autoimmune. She caused it.
But true type 1s, their pancreas isn't working. And so you need to have insulin externally, exogenous insulin, to not only a baseline, but also, and this is kind of gets to the heart of what insulin is in general too, is there's kind of two different factors of insulin, and type 1s understand this well. They have a basal insulin dose. It's like a slow acting dose of insulin that is there all day long, because you and I, with a functioning pancreas, we sit here with insulin all day long being excreted, and it's basically to hold fuels back into storage. Most people think of insulin as this storage hormone where it stores off fuels. It also holds back fuels from flooding into your bloodstream. So it's kind of like a net on your fat cells holding back the fat from coming out into the bloodstream. And so if you look at somebody eating a low carb diet, and they've done this with type ones. There's I have it in my presentation, but there's a study. They looked at a bunch of type ones, and with type ones, you know exactly how much insulin is being used, right? Because you have to take it all externally, so you can measure how much insulin they needed. And eating low carb diets, the type ones on average had about, I think it was about almost 80% of the insulin that they used all day long was for basal insulin. That's just that insulin all day long to hold back the fuels, and only 20% of the insulin was for insulin for meals. So if you look at that, it's like, okay, well, basal insulin, the insulin all day long, is 80% of my insulin output. That seems like a more important insulin to be concerned about than maybe some insulin after meals.
Have you heard of insulin resistance being caused by gut and nerve damage?
There's a lot of factors that go into insulin resistance, and chronically elevated insulin levels can cause glycation and factors that can influence insulin resistance. Lack of sleep can affect insulin resistance and those kind of things.
But
But the main root cause is going to be those fat cells being overstuffed. Other factors can definitely make it worse and be contributors, but the main root cause is your fat cells are just not taking fat anymore.
there are a lot of estrogen receptors in the gut. And so during perimenopause, which can happen in the 30s, like people don't realize how young that can happen. And I've dealt with a lot of women that did have gut issues like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, things like that, because of the lack of estrogen. So just being aware, but again, the main issue is going to be the fat cells.
What I get a lot of questions of things like, if I go on a carnivore diet or a keto diet, how come some people will report that they have super low blood sugar? How is that even possible if there's nothing that they're putting in their body to give them an insulin response? How come they're having low blood sugar? Like, do you know what's going wrong there?
Well, everybody's going to have a different baseline level for glucose and different fuels in their blood. I mean, a lot of factors, genetics, their activity level, their lean mass amount, different things. Generally speaking, like 80, 85 milligrams per deciliter is kind of an ideal fasting glucose level, that baseline. But it's going to vary, and especially if you do a major change in diet, there could be like
The ketones.
some readjustment of levels and that kind of thing. But at any given time, one of the things that's a little bit misleading is people think when you eat a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet that the majority of your fuel that your body's now using is ketones. It's not. It's free fatty acids. What happens is that fat that's stored in your fat cell is a triglyceride molecule, which is three free fatty acids linked together with a glycerol backbone. That's a triglyceride. So when your body needs fuel and you're not eating carbs, it takes the glycerol off. Those three free fatty acids go into the bloodstream and get used by your muscles and your tissues as fuel directly burns the free fatty acids. That's the majority of the fuel that your body's using. And some of those free fatty acids can go to the liver and get turned into ketones, which can fuel parts of the brain, heart that prefer ketones. But still, the majority of the fuel that your body's using is free fatty acids being burned directly. And when you're in that state, you're eating carnivore, very low carb, your body relies less on glucose, right? So it's relying more on fat as its fuel, free fatty acids, ketones. So yeah, your blood glucose levels will probably come down significantly because it's not using glucose as much as a fuel.
And Dr. Boz talks about, as long as you're not symptomatic, that some of those lower glucoses are actually therapeutic. Is that true?
I don't know if it's therapeutic, but it can be normal in that, if you're not having symptoms, and a lot of this too, you got to be careful. Like people will wear CGMs, like the Libre CGM. A lot of people use, and they'll see this real low glucose. Well, those things aren't super accurate for absolute levels. And then if you did like a finger prick, meter that's been calibrated, you might see that you're not really that low. So that's probably a factor too.
I had one question where they said, I eat carnivore, nothing but carnivore, but if I fast and then I work out, I get hypoglycemic. Do you have any idea what's happening there?
Well, so I would ask, how long you're fasting and why are you fasting? We actually don't really recommend fasting longer than 24 hours because, and this could lead into the protein sparing discussion, but
You're gonna lose hair.
if
you're
you fast longer than 24 hours, you start to lose lean mass, muscle. And so it's not ideal, especially as we get older, when it's so hard to build muscle as you get older. Losing any is a bad idea. And so we do different things like protein sparing modified fast instead of a extended fast, because then you preserve your muscle instead of lose it.
What exercise is going to, like, people don't realize there are good stressors that are going to cause your blood sugar to go high. Exercise is one of those. Sauna is another. Cold plunges, or stress in general, that can change your blood sugar too. But like, people don't realize there are some good stressors out there. So having a flatline blood sugar is not ideal.
Yeah.
Before we go into the PSMF, if people were fasting, have you heard about people using things like optimal amino, perfect amino, where it's supposed to be all the amino acids, but it's like in a tab? Is that
I would just get it from food, because if
you're not going to get the nutrients.
Branched chain amino acid, you're just getting the amino acids, and you're not. One of the great things about animal proteins and why we always prioritize protein, complete proteins, is you get all the amino acids, but for muscle and all, your body's constantly rebuilding hair and skin and all these things that need amino acids. But you're also getting the most nutrient dense food that's loaded with vitamins and minerals, which is also great for the body for healing and all those things. So with the amino acid supplement, you're not going to get any of those vitamins and minerals.
So is there any known way to, let's say if I keto long enough, will I be able to, let's say I have insulin resistance and I struggle with carbohydrates, they spike me up. If I keto long enough, will there ever be a time where I could process carbohydrates better?
So that's kind of going back to the insulin resistance question, and how do you reverse it, right? So if you have insulin resistance, that means your fat cells are overstuffed and inflamed, and this causes all of the fuels in the body to struggle to be stored or utilized because there's just too much of all the fuels. So not only will triglycerides go up, but your glucose levels will go up, and all these. So it's a bad state for the body in general. And to reverse that, the two things you need to do are, number one, shrink those fat cells. How do you shrink the fat cells? You have more fat getting burned out of them than you're consuming in energy and other things you're consuming, right? So the fat cells will shrink because you're losing body fat. The other thing to do is to maintain or grow your muscle mass, because that gives glucose more places to be stored. So as you maintain or grow your muscle, you have more storage place for the glucose. And guess what? Over time, that means you could handle more glucose better in the diet, right? Because there's more places to store it, and you're not in this state where your fat cells are all stuffed. So you have room. You got some leeway there as far as that goes.
I'm one of those examples. I was so insulin resistant, I couldn't handle any carbohydrates, and now I can handle any of them. Not that I add those, but if I were to test with them, I'm fine.
Yeah.
That's super interesting and very hopeful. So we have a lot of people, I hear this story all the time. I went carnivore and then my A1C went up. And people will say, you're eating too much protein. But I'm wondering if that's not true, if it's really an indicator that they need to heal something else. Have you guys seen that?
Could be that they need to. So my first question for them is going to be, what is your protein and fat macro, and are you losing any body fat? Okay, so as you lose body fat, you will, because we see this all the time, where especially with women, they go carnivore and they gain weight, and then they're told you're healing, but
you're not healing.
But you're not, because especially if you're close to your fat threshold, gaining more fat,
That's dangerous.
and when you're insulin resistant, again, that's the root cause, is those fat cells being too stuffed. You gain more fat, you've made the problem worse, not better.
That's not healing.
And that's not healing. So part of healing when it comes to insulin resistance is the fat loss, is the weight loss by shrinking those fat cells. And so that has to be your starting point as far as, am I going in the right direction for this problem, right? And if you're if you're gaining body fat, your insulin levels are going to go up, your fasting insulin levels are going to go up more, and your A1C is probably going to go up. So those can be factors there. If they didn't gain weight, or if they've lost weight, I would still look at, maybe they're overdoing the fat and not getting enough protein. Because overdoing fat, again, let's talk about the bloodstream. It likes to be in this tight control of fuel. You got all this extra fuel coming in because you're eating, sticks of butter with your steak, and now it's not storing the glucose as well either, because there's just all this extra fuel that insulin has to deal with, right? And so we'll see this all the time, where somebody kind of overdoes the fat a day before, like a sticks of butter and all that. The next morning, their fasting glucose will be higher because there's just too much fuel that was dumped into. And the other thing, just one more thing on fat. A lot of people say, well, but fat doesn't affect insulin, or insulin, it does. And it actually is more of a kind of long tail response than that post meal response, right? So post meal, carbs and protein will have a distinct response in insulin, which is okay for the protein, because you need to utilize the protein to make muscle. And that's what insulin does, right? Without insulin, you're not going to make use of that protein. So it's a good thing. Fat doesn't, it affects it a little, but not much post meal. But there's been studies, again, with type 1s where you know exactly how much insulin is being used. They had 2 meals, exact same carbs and protein in both meals. It's just one meal they added, I think, 60 grams of extra fat for the day. And for that one added fat, between the two, the insulin on the added fat meal for the entire day went up 72%. It's a long tail where you see on the graph the insulin requirements for the whole day just kind of get increased. And when you integrate that, over a whole day, it ends up being quite a bit more insulin that's required, because it's more fuel that the body has to deal with.
I feel like I'm a canary a little bit. I had the gastric bypass, so I have reactive hypoglycemia now, and I'm really, really sensitive. And protein has not ever one time spiked my insulin. Well, made me had hypoglycemia. And I hear people say all the time that it did for them, and I'm not going to deny that we're all different, and mine is surgery based, but I mean, I feel like I'm like the most sensitive person on earth, and eating protein makes me feel amazing.
Yeah,
I would
exactly.
say they're probably adding a stick of butter to their protein.
Is probably going to cause
Right,
other issues than
right.
anything. But yeah, it's definitely individual. But I would also question whether, how did they know they were hypoglycemic? Because we hear that a lot of times. People say that, well, I just felt a little of this or that.
It could be
Unless
electrolytes.
It could be just you were low on electrolytes, because a lot of times when people increase their protein, they need more electrolytes.
Yep.
And if they're not adding electrolytes, they could have just had a little bit of dehydration, and those symptoms are very similar. The lightheadedness, this and that. So, that's, I would make sure that they're actually doing a finger prick meter to make sure that they're hypoglycemic.
Yeah. In my case, I'm like in 36. If I eat carbohydrates, I'm legitimately, it's bad.
Right.
This is kind of an off topic, but we've talked about this before, and it just means a lot to me to put a little warning out there if you guys have any experience with this. I went lion diet in an attempt to further heal, further push this, because regular carnivore wasn't working for me. I was struggling with weight gain. I was just continually struggling with hormone issues. So I did the lion diet, and about 30 days, 35 days in, my thyroid took a crash, my hormones took a crash, my body got super inflamed, and I was told to just do it longer. I was wondering if you've seen that in other people, or if that was just me.
Boy, so was that because you went to like one meal a day on the eating?
No, all I had was ruminant meat, salt, and water. And for me, I'll never forget the day that I gave up and I had some salmon and it was like the best thing I ever ate in my life. Like to me, I feel like maybe my hormones were like, this is too stressful and I needed more nutrition. Maybe I needed eggs or
Think I've heard that before. Just eating meat and salt. I
You
was
weren't doing
thinking.
any caffeine?
no, just water, salt, ruminant meat. So maybe it was just me and my fragile body.
I haven't heard that before with that specifically. I thought maybe if you went to, I think one of the things with the line diet, people do like one meal a day, and
That's too stressful, especially for
that could be,
perimenopause.
yeah. But especially for women, it's hard for them to get enough protein in one meal. But yeah, I haven't really heard that before. That's interesting.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Just wondering. Okay, so next I want to go into protein sparing modified fast. For some reason, people are highly offended by this. Where I where I'm coming from is I'm thinking of myself. I'm out in the wild. I don't have a grocery store, and I'm like, oh, there's a rabbit. Rabbits are very lean. Oh, I caught a bird today. Birds are lean. Hey, I caught some fish. There's no sticks of butter in the woods. I think it would have been natural. I personally feel great when I eat high protein. Why are people so offended by this? And what's the problem here?
That's the whole thing too. It's like our ancestors, they didn't just eat the ribeye.
Yeah.
There was,
They
there
ate
was,
the
and
whole animal.
most wild game is very lean. Deer, like venison's lean,
Rabbits.
moose is lean. It's all lean.
Bird.
Yeah, it's all very lean. And this is something that we had a lot of people losing muscle mass doing either one meal a day or extended fasting, water fasting. And so it's just why don't you go?
Yeah, I mean, I love how people think it's so controversial and extreme, but then those same people will say, "Yeah,
Just-
do a 2 day fast
Yeah.
where you eat nothing for 2 days." So how is eating some protein for 2 days worse than eating nothing for 2 days? That just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, that's dogmatic, and you're kind
They're
of
just jealous because it works.
It does work.
Amen.
Yeah, it does work really well. And again, back to the fasting we talked about earlier, a protein sparing modified fast, it's kind of a weird term because it sounds like you're sparing the protein in the diet, but it's the opposite. You're sparing the protein on the body. So what you're doing is you're modifying an extended fast to spare your body's protein. So that's protein sparing modified fast.
Mm-hmm.
How you do that? You eat little to no energy. So carbs very low, fat very low, like 20, 30 grams of fat, just enough to absorb fat soluble vitamins and get, essential fatty acids for the day. And then protein, like your normal amount of protein. So that's going to give you enough amino acids and vitamins and minerals from the protein, which is very nutrient dense, to supply your body with what it needs to function and to preserve your muscle while getting very low energy. So you mimic a fast in that way, and some of the benefits you're seeing with that.
And there's a thermic effect of food of protein where it takes a lot of energy to burn it versus carbs or fat.
Yeah, to utilize protein just to digest it and make use of it, it's like 25 to 30% of the calories of it are burned. And that's kind of the meat sweats, right? If you eat a lot of protein, your body is like, okay, I'm making muscle today, and making muscle is a very energy intensive process.
And you're saying it worked for you?
I think it's wonderful. It makes me feel amazing. I hear people say, oh my gosh, it's so tough. And even in my days where I was struggling with weight, it didn't feel tough to me. I never felt sick. Does it put you into ketosis or not really?
I mean, generally speaking, it depends what your definition of ketosis is, but we always talk about keto being you're burning fat as your primary fuel, and all you need for that is to have carbohydrates low enough.
Yeah.
That's the only requirement. But the protein. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Well, here's the thing: fat and carbs are energy. Protein's not a good energy source. Yeah. So if you are small like you are, I'm not going to recommend you do a protein sparing modified fast because you don't have enough energy on your body to. I'm serious. Well, we don't do it anymore.
That's
right?
an important point. It's not a lifestyle. It's not something. It's a tool for weight loss.
Yeah.
So if you're not trying to lose weight or body fat,
well, even
it's
like
not for you.
10 pounds or 20 pounds is probably not for you. You're going to be super hungry. And I'm guessing that's the people you were talking to that said it was too tough. They were too hungry, because the people that we're working with that are 100 pounds overweight, or like Tyler, who was 600 and some pounds, he could have done that
almost
for
every day.
every day, and he wasn't hungry because he had so much energy on his body.
Yeah, to tap his fuel.
Yeah.
So when people are looking into this, they can get your cookbook on protein sparing modified fast and how many days do you do it, and the free recipes. And how often do people do it? Do you do it like once every 3 days?
Well,
1 to 3 days a
yeah,
week.
we typically say like 1 to 3 days a week is, and if you on the higher end of that, you're doing like 3 days every single week. Then maybe add an overfeeding day, which is basically a day of eating at maintenance level
Yeah,
of calories.
it's not a Pizza Hut day. It's more like a maintenance. It maybe a ribeye or fatty ribs, something like that. But we still recommend dairy free the whole time.
To better
That
weight
includes
loss.
butter.
Yeah, that for better weight for better fat loss, being 100% dairy free is
Yep.
going to help a lot, and that's one of the reasons that a lot of women actually gain weight on carnivores, because
They're doing so much.
you don't have a lot of
dairy.
options for food on carnivore, and cheese and dairy and butter are one of the options. So they overdo it and they get too much fat and end up gaining weight.
So if I do protein sparing modified fast, am I going to get gallbladder sludge? Because isn't gallbladder sludge us not eating enough fat? Like, where's the threshold of I'm going to have gallbladder issues?
So a couple things on that. Number one,
Only 30
there's
grams.
only like 20 grams of fat that are required for like an essential level of fat, and none of them are saturated fat. I just want to make that clear. You know, a lot of people in this community be like, carbohydrates are a non-essential nutrient, and they are. Your body can make all the carbohydrates it needs during the day, but saturated fat is also a non-essential fatty acid if you got extra fat on your body, right? Your body can make all the saturated fat it needs internally. That's why it's not an essential fatty acid. Omega 6s are essential fatty acids, and omega 3s are essential fatty acids because your body can't make those. Okay. And so when we talk about 20 grams of fat as sort of the floor of what you need for absorbing fat soluble vitamins. So you need some fat to absorb, like vitamin D and A, D, E, and K, your fat soluble vitamins. But the essential fatty acids that prevent any deficiencies are the omega 3 and 6. Those are essential fatty acids, not saturated fat. And so, how much you need in the body on a day to day basis, yeah, I'm not going to say that 20 grams every day is a thriving situation. That's why we say only do it 1 to maybe 3 days a week. But at the same time, for any effects on the gallbladder, I mean, maybe you could get into a situation like that if you're eating 20 grams of fat every day for several months.
But we don't recommend that.
But obviously, that's not recommended, and that's
we
part of the
haven't
reason.
had anybody have an issue.
Yeah, it's never been an issue.
Yeah, that's back in my Biggest Loser days. We were just eating vegetables and you're putting fat-free dressing on top and eating chicken and fish. Have you
That's
guys
fun.
seen? I was recently listening to a podcast with Dr. Amy Horniman and Dr. Tina Moore, and if you know those two, and they were saying that carnivore caused people to be more insulin resistant, and they mentioned something about arachidonic acid and adiponectin. Do you know anything about that?
Adiponectin is so your fat cells. Okay, let's go back to the fat cells. Right, when they're happy and small, so you don't want a low number of fat cells necessarily, right? You don't like this is one of the reasons that liposuction is actually not a great idea, because you're lowering your personal fat threshold, and now you can stuff your fat cells quicker and become insulin resistant quicker. So you're losing some buffer there, right? And so when the fat cells are small, when they're small, they're happy, and they put out a hormone called adiponectin, and it basically, if there's been thousands of studies on adiponectin and showing that higher levels of adiponectin, meaning your fat cells are small and happy, are related to all kinds of beneficial health things. You know, whether it's liver function, pancreas, all of the things. When adiponectin's low, meaning your fat cells are stuffed and they're not putting out as much adiponectin, it causes it's associated with all kinds of metabolic breakdown. It's liver dysfunction and all kinds of different pancreas, all of these things. So that's what adiponectin is.
Is there a test for that, did you say?
There is, but it's a little bit of one of those that kind of moves around during the day, and so it can be a good if you know how to interpret it and look at it. If you test it, over multiple times and see kind of where your baseline is. We tend to look at something like taking your fasting glucose and your fasting insulin and getting like a HOMA IR from that kind of gives you a better indication of your insulin resistance state.
So when you eat carnivore, you're not going to have a lot of metabolic flexibility.
Mhm.
But if that's your lifestyle, do you really care?
Yeah, I mean if it depends on your situation, right? If you want to add things back in, and back to what we were talking about earlier, your metabolic flexibility, because you're more metabolically flexible, doesn't necessarily mean it's a great idea for you to go there because everybody's a little different when it comes to this, right? We have people who they were like they had lost 100 pounds, they were very happy with their situation, etc. They were at a party and they decided to have that one cupcake,
Yeah.
and it was going to be just that one cupcake.
Oh.
And a year later, they come back to us because they gained all the weight back. That one cupcake led to a completely off the rails for a year and gaining all the weight back. And so that becomes a conversation now of, can you have that one cupcake? Because if you're the kind of person that's like, okay, I can have that and then go right back to where I was, whatever, then whatever you want to do. But if you're that kind of person that it triggers you and you just want more and more, it's probably a food you can't reintroduce.
I think after a while you become that person that just doesn't want it.
Yeah, that becomes especially when you have all the recipes to replicate
and you're okay
things.
with that.
Yeah,
I just don't want it.
Turning the I can't have that into
I don't
want that because I know what it does to my body and how it makes me feel. That can be very helpful in the long term.
Yeah. Have you seen, because one thing that the two doctors went into was that sometimes they've given some of their patients just a little bit of carbohydrate and it helped improve their hormones and their glucose
Well,
numbers.
If they're talking about like thyroid hormones, yeah, if you add carbohydrates, typically the thyroid numbers will go to a more normal range. But there's a great article by Dr. Finney on this. There's a study that he digests in this article that I can send to you, where basically his at the end of the day, the obvious outcome was, yes, your body was putting out less T3, but it was because your body was more sensitive.
It was more
the
efficient.
cells were more efficient at using it. And so adding carbohydrates to force it to put out more versus is kind of like telling somebody who's diabetic, insulin resistant, to add more carbohydrates to force their pancreas to put out more insulin. Probably not a good idea, right?
No.
And so it's more about the sensitivity of the cells to it, and it was obvious that these people were functioning better even though the levels were lower because of the low carb diet.
So I think they're looking at the wrong thing.
Yeah, I might be looking at it from a different way. And I think Dr. Finney's article is really great on that. I can send it to you.
I think for me, I have the reactive hypoglycemia. This is the best way for me to control it. If some of the other numbers are off, I think I have to heal something underneath that's going on. I don't think it's like my ancestors weren't eating strawberries all year.
Well, here's the thing. When you're looking at numbers, they're taking numbers in a lab of the median of people who are going to the doctor who are sick, most likely, right?
Yeah,
they're not studying carnivores. So what is the normal T3 for carnivores? We just don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
And labs, literally, if you look at the ranges in a lab, they change over time. Why? Because they're just getting the average of the blood tests they get.
Well, I work with people around the world, and the labs are all different around the world because it's just the median of California versus, it's all different.
What that lab is seeing as the average results. So who's getting blood labs?
People who are
typically
sick.
Not the healthiest people.
No.
So yeah, it's kind of skewed.
So my next one's real controversial. Okay. I have been using some GLP-1, some low dose, and I know that you guys have had some clients using it. I have no idea if they knew about low dose or how they were utilizing it, but I was wondering, for me, it has been completely game changing as far as how my body processes food, how my reactive hypoglycemia is a lot more in check, my glucose numbers are better, and I feel like my metabolism is actually working because I can eat food, I can eat meat without all of the weight gain that I was constantly dealing with. But what have you guys seen? Like, you don't have to sugarcoat it for me because I know that there are different ways to use it and not all of them are great. What have you guys seen?
So It depends on it's. I'm not sure about the low dose situation, and I don't know, what is a low dose compared to the typical dose and all that. But I do know at the typical dose, you're going to definitely want to be looking at making sure you're maintaining muscle mass, because the studies on this have been showing 40-50% muscle loss with the weight loss. So 40-50% of the weight loss was muscle loss, which you'd really, again, back to not losing muscle, especially as we get older, and giving more muscle means more places for glucose to go and more metabolic flexibility in the future. That's not a good thing. And if you eat a good diet with prioritizing protein and strength training or yoga or something with it, you can get the muscle loss down to like below 8% or less of the weight is muscle loss. You're always gonna have a little bit of muscle loss with fat loss, but getting it that low, that's ideal. So 40-50 is that's concerning, and that's definitely something I would look at, is make sure you're doing something to maintain that muscle mass.
So in that case, it wasn't even about the hunger
It's more
because
of
they
an
weren't.
emotional.
It was more emotional.
Yeah,
So
it's like,
dealing with what your triggers are, I think, is really important, and dealing with someone who specializes in that. But again, if it's a low dose and you're prioritizing protein, you're not
Doing
binge eating
some
on carbs. Because I
strength
think
training
a lot of
and
people that came to us, they were binge eating on carbohydrates and on that. And again, sure, they were losing weight, but a lot of it was muscle loss because they were just eating the cereal and all the stuff that
what's the
they
thing
should.
on the full dose of those kind of things, you're just not hungry very often. So when you're not really
Nobody wants to
hungry,
eat protein then.
are you going to want to eat a chicken breast? No, you're going to want to eat the cereal or the chips or
Donut.
ice cream.
Yeah.
That's the thing that's the only thing that's going to sound good to you at that point. So
Have you guys looked into Dr. Boz has recently been talking about it, and I think because I recently talked to her about it, that she's requiring, if you're going to be on this, I want you in ketosis. I want you eating a ketogenic diet, and I want you low dose enough that you have no problems eating your protein and your lifting, and we're watching your fat loss. And have you guys looked into the science of why it works at all?
Well, we're not
well,
prescribing it. Let's just say that. Like, I know she's
yeah.
prescribing it. We don't prescribe it.
Well, look, first of all, being in ketosis, I think, has zero relevance to any of that. As long as you're prioritizing protein and strength training, that's going to be the biggest key. Getting enough protein every day and strength training to maintain that muscle. That's going to be your biggest key. Whether you're in ketosis or not is irrelevant.
Because the longer you've been in ketosis, the harder it's going to be to have a higher number. It's just because your body's more efficient. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
Yeah, there's kind of another part of this community that chases high blood ketone levels.
We don't.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really irrelevant. There is zero studies ever associating high blood ketone levels with weight loss or better results when it comes to weight loss. So there's really zero reason to chase a high blood ketone level. There's nothing you get from it from a weight loss perspective. And in fact, a lot of times when you try to push your blood ketone level up,
it just means you
by eating
fat.
Add lots of extra fat, you actually slow your weight loss or gain weight. You can gain weight with really high blood ketone levels.
Especially like if you're adding exogenous ketones, that's a great way to gain weight. So if you're adding exogenous ketones to make sure you're in ketosis, good luck on that.
You're slowing your results.
Yep.
If not gaining weight.
So I'm wondering if that's the message there that she's pushing. I don't know.
Interesting. It's that if because of the numbers changing, they're saying with the reduced inflammation and better hormone signaling that you can get better autophagy for healing. And her goal is not weight loss. I think it's healing.
Autophagy becomes this buzzword that people use.
Such
that
crap.
They don't really understand autophagy.
How do you even measure that?
First of all, there's no direct measurement for autophagy. Second of all, there are things that increase autophagy as much or more based on the markers than even extended fasting, right? So you're supposed to be like one of the biggest benefits of fasting longer than 24 hours is supposed to be autophagy, right? Yeah. Well, if the markers for autophagy that they look at, things like strength training increase autophagy as much or more. And guess what? You're maintaining muscle and building muscle versus losing muscle. So I would definitely want the autophagy coming from strength training, not that from these other factors.
But how are you measuring it? Come on, people.
Yeah,
I
there's no
mean,
measuring
it's just a
autophagy.
buzzword. It's crap.
So
Autophagy is
interesting.
happening all the time in your body. The Nobel Prize winner for his research on autophagy, doctor from Japan, I can't remember his name.
It's a long name.
Yeah, he estimates that every 3 to 4 months you turn over all your protein cells through autophagy. And this is people, the average person out there eating the standard American diet. Every 3 to 4 months, you turn over all the protein cells in your body. So why do we have to speed that up? Autophagy is happening all the time at some level.
So, GLP-1 is like a common thing people talk about, but it's actually part of a whole family. Have you guys looked into any of the other ones that are out there?
GLP-1s or peptides in general?
Peptides. Because people are like, oh, it's a drug, it's a drug. And then people say, oh, it's a peptide, and there's other peptides.
The protein based, so
There's
insulin is a peptide. I mean,
I love peptides. I mean, I think that they're the new wave of like how people can heal, like BPC 157, how that can help with healing or pain. GHKCU, that's great for like skin and hair growth. And MOTC, that's like a mitochondria uncoupler. It's like an exercise mimetic. Like that's super. But again, like if you get into that, it's really expensive, and you got to find a doctor that's really knowledgeable on like the dosages and how much to do, and you know.
Yeah, and it depends on what you're talking about. What are you looking to use it for, right? And if it's general health and losing weight, that's all about macros, getting your macros right, and strength training and that kind of stuff. This is going to be a much lower percentage benefit than fixing your diet and exercise.
Yeah, I did hear a lot of people say, oh, it didn't work for me. And then people say, well, that's because you're a dumpster fire. Like, oh, that's what people say. Those are not my terms, other people's terms. But if you're doing the things, you're eating low carbohydrate, you're eating whole foods, you have your thyroid in check, maybe you've looked into bioidentical hormones, and then you look into this one added piece. Like for me, I added the TB500 BBC 157, and I swear, I used to not be able to eat outside my home, and I recently ate at a Mexican restaurant, and I didn't even tell them hold the seed oil, and that's not optimal, but I'm just saying I didn't have a food reaction for like the first time in 10 years.
That's great.
That's great.
They're
Yeah,
pretty
the
amazing.
next way to do it is fix all the other problems, and then if you still have something that you're concerned with, maybe that'll help out.
Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about are your challenges. I did your September challenge. I was shocked how full I was. I was shocked how it was such a good reset of, hey, I'm grazing on dairy all day, and now I'm dairy free and I have support. I'm doing it with a group of people. I'm a pretty, let's say, so let's not use negative words here like lazy, but I would like to eat hamburger and eggs for every meal, and then you get bored of it, and then you start grazing on dairy. You got me eating other foods that felt good, and it was looking forward to eating. And so you have a challenge coming up. By the time this airs, it might have already started. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's the March challenge. It starts March 1st. So if it's after that, we're gonna have another one in May. So, but it's really awesome. I mean, the one of the best parts about it is
You get a community.
this community, this private support group that you get into.
People
that
love it.
Everybody's so supportive, and that's the biggest part of that journey that is so beneficial, I think. But also
you get weekly meetings with us.
Yeah, weekly coaching calls with us each week on Sundays. And then when you're in the challenge, there's a bunch of great resources and information, as well as 3 different sets of meal plans. So you can actually go into the challenge and say, I'm going to do carnivore, or I'm going to do keto, or I'm going to do. We have these
super easy
ketovore style meal plans that we just added. So they're super easy, almost no prep or anything. It's super easy to follow. So you can pick which one you want. And then within that, we have different sets of meal plans for different height ranges to make sure you're getting the right amount of protein for your height. So you just go in, you pick the one that works for you, and you follow it. Everything's all laid out. You get grocery lists, all the recipes.
What's cool is like as soon as you sign up, you get all the resources. So you can start meal planning. You could start the challenge right as soon as you sign up. So I know some people started already.
Yeah.
printing all the meal plans.
There you
Yay!
go.
I love it. Thank you for your support. You're great.
I actually am joining your march, even though let's say I have 5 pounds of fat left to lose. I'm just going to up instead of being so low. I'm going to up because really anything I do from here really just needs to be fat loss. But I want to reset my hunger cues. I want to stop grazing, and I need help to stop eating so much dairy. I will never give up dairy for my life, but I
Yeah.
know being an autoimmune, inflamed, SIRSy person, that if I do periods of no dairy, it's better for my
I love
condition.
it.
So,
I wanted to tell you though, on my Costa Rica retreat, your name was buzzing around the dinner table. They were like, "Do you know this Adrian person? She was on The Biggest Loser. She is awesome. She talks about her autoimmune and SIRS and all this stuff. Like they watch you
oh,
like every day."
I love that. I
Isn't that
know all my
cool?
people love you. They were very excited. I told them that we were doing this, and some of the questions were from my group. So if
Awesome.
anybody needs a group, Eat Meat, Lift Heavy GOP group. But a lot of us are coming over to your challenge because
Thank you.
I really encourage people, if you're going to add low dose GLP or whatever dose, micro dose, whatever your dose is, you have to eat your meat. You don't want to be grazing all day. And your meal plans are 2 per day, but people can break it up if they need to, like if you're gastric
Yeah.
bypass or whatever. And so we're coming over to do some clean eating and be part of it.
Right.
I
Awesome.
did have some questions though, and I thought this myself, which is, for my range, your, let's say, calories were below my TDEE. I was really worried that would affect my thyroid, but I'll tell you, 4.5 months out, I did not have hair loss, and I'm sensitive. I did too much sardine fasting one summer and my hair fell out. I did not have slowed thyroid because I continued on my journey, and I continued to slowly lose weight month after month after your process. So even though it was below my TDEE, for me, Mrs. Sensitive, it was fine. How do you guys come up with these numbers, and is it okay?
It's because you're prioritizing the protein.
Mhm.
That's so key when you're doing any of this, especially in protein sparing or anything, is you get that protein level up. Even if you're dropping the fat down a bit, keeping the protein level up. Make sure your hair, your nails, everything your body needs amino acids for every day. And we just talked about peptides; they're amino acid based signaling molecules. You need amino acids for insulin and hormones and all these things. So keeping the protein up makes sure that you don't drop your metabolic rate. And a lot of metabolic rate dropping from lower calories is because you're underdoing protein. You're not getting enough protein, and you're losing muscle. And then that less muscle means a lower BMR, which means you have to eat less to maintain down the road. And so that's the
And we
big
do have
key.
a free calculator that if anybody wants to do that, it's on our website, ketomaria.com.
Yeah.
Free.
So, can they join after March 1st, or they need to wait till May?
So we usually shut it down after the first
Meeting,
webinar, and the
which is on
first
the 2nd.
is on the second. So it'll probably be shut down on the second.
But you guys have a silver membership or something people can join any day of the year?
Platinum membership gives a different set of weekly coaching calls, and you
Yep.
also get access to meal plans and the meal planner tool and all
Yep.
that. So you get a lot of what's in the challenge. You just don't get the private support group really.
Okay, I'll put a link down below. So if anybody wants to
Thank
join that, otherwise, you said May is the next one.
Yeah.
you.
So April 14th, the May challenge will open up for registration.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the minute that they register, they can start accessing all the tools.
Yep. If you do it on the 14th, you actually get almost 2 months of access because we give people access till the 12th day after the month in case they want to go back in and get the meal plans or do whatever. So if you sign up on the first day, you get almost 2 months of access.
And that's directly, then you get the community, which you guys are having on Mighty Networks now.
Yes. Yep. It's a private support community. It's really awesome.
Well, I highly recommend it. It'll get your butt in gear to get back to clean eating, maybe add some foods to your life, and you can bounce between the meal plans if you want, but kind of stick to
Yep.
the macros, and you get the support and you get the community. And I feel like it propelled me forward to where I am today. When I came to your challenge, I had just gained 35 pounds. I was in the dumps. I was feeling like there's just no way. My body sucks.
Yeah.
I was feeling like there's no way to turn this train around. That's how I
Yeah.
was feeling. And within
Well,
3
awesome.
days of the meal plan, I was feeling like, okay, I can do this. I got this. And to be clear,
Love
I
that.
did not have a peptide on board for about half of the challenge. So the
Awesome.
first couple weeks of the challenge, it was just me eating food, following the plan, being part of the community, and it was just a coincidence that partway in is anyway.
Well, thank you for your support.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
This
Yeah,
is
thank
awesome.
you so much for coming on. Everyone, if you like this content, please like, subscribe, and share. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.